Lindsay.
Hey, Anya.
As you may know, we had a bunch of people reach out on social media with a ton of really good questions for what you do at POW. Would you mind giving the community a little introduction on who you are and what you do here?
Sure. My name is Lindsay Bourgoine. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director at Protect Our Winters, and I started with POW in 2016.
I want to jump in on some of the fun questions first from the community. First of all, people had a lot of questions about Pemi, your dog. Where did the name come from?
Nice.
What kind of dog is she? How did she get in your life?
So Pemi is a shelter special. She comes from Kansas, so we call her Kansas Special. Technically, probably a blue heeler, Australian Shepherd, Border Collie. Take all the energetic dogs, put them into one, you get Pemi. And yes, for those of you that are on the East Coast, she is named after the Pemigewasset. She goes by Pemi, sometimes Pemi G, sometimes Pemi G Wasset. But yeah, I grew up in Maine and spent a lot of time hiking in the Whites in New Hampshire. And so decided to carry on a little tradition of a pretty typical thing those of us seems to do by naming our dog after a place we love.
And I know a lot of people were wondering, you kind of, your roots are in Maine, and that's all we really know about you. How did you come to be a Mainer and then move yourself all the way out to Colorado and work for POW?
Yeah, so I grew up in small town Maine, kind of near Augusta, central Maine, and traveled around a bit. As I said, I worked in the White Mountains for the Appalachian Mountain Club. And over time, I ended up living in 8 states in 8 years. So I have lived in New Hampshire, in Vermont, in New York, obviously in Maine, in Montana, in Colorado, in California, and Nevada. And I used to feel like moving around all the time, like you weren't putting down roots. But I think the reality is now working for a national nonprofit, I know people in all of those places. I understand a bit about those communities, and I think it makes you really versatile and able to relate with a lot of people. So even though it felt like bouncing back and forth a lot, I'm glad to have those experiences. And at some point made it to Colorado to work for Protect Our Winters. But the really quick story there is before I went to grad school, I worked at a place called the Outdoor Industry Association in Colorado, working with outdoor businesses on policy issues from recreation to trade. And through that, met some staff at Protect Our Winters, got my signature beanie and my die cut sticker, headed off to grad school at Vermont Law School, and had that sticker on my computer all through every class. People asked me about it all the time. And it was an organization I cared about, but didn't really know a lot more about the staff and the jobs there. Wrapped up grad school, didn't have a job, moved to Tahoe, seemed like a beautiful place to be a ski bum, and through a friend of a friend, met this guy named Jeremy Jones. And I think that's like an easy way to wrap it up of that's like how I ended up there. But through that was really being an advocate for doing what I hope to do and kind of my dream job. And so I would just encourage everyone out there who's excited about jobs, like working on policy for POW, to push hard to get what you want. And I think, Anya, you have a little bit of experience in that too, of, saying, hey, I'm going to work here and I'm going to figure out a way to do it. So shoot for the stars.
Yeah, I think it's fun. It's a lot of people's POW experience. I started out as a volunteer and I saw you, Lindsay, speak at University of Colorado Boulder with Jake Black, who wasn't actually on the team full time at the time, but was part of the Athlete Alliance. And after that talk, I walked out of that room and said, I'm going to work for that organization someday. And it's just been I want to say a slow trickle, but maybe like a hard rushing stream of volunteer work and staying involved and learning and getting through grad school. And it's not really a one size fits all. But if you had one piece of advice to give somebody who wants to get involved in this kind of work, what would you tell them to do?
There's a lot of things I think I would pick, but I feel like early on, I had an opportunity to work in the Maine State House and spend a lot of time there. And to some extent, being like a 23-year-old in a state house in a place where legislators are often retired, I was kind of like stuck out like a sore thumb. But I think I also got the opportunity to see how law is made, how policy is made, and the conversations that happen. And so, even though at that point I had a degree in geology and not a advanced degree in policy or law, kind of having those personal experiences and learning that firsthand, hands-on, and then kind of applying that to go back to grad school later and actually learn the academic principles behind what I was kind of observing. So I think just like getting your hands dirty and jumping in and being confident that even if you have no idea what people are talking about in a legislative hearing, which definitely has happened to me before, you're kind of like learning the language so that you can dive deeper later on.
I think that will be super helpful for the community. I can't even express how many questions we had about, if I wanted this job, what are the steps I need to do to get there? So I think people will be really excited about that. With that, we're going to just start jumping into some policy questions because that is what you do. And looking over here at the list, a lot of people are thinking obviously about COVID-19 right now and how that is going to impact some things coming up. Obviously, POW is working very hard on the get out the vote for the 2020 general elections coming up. It feels like a far time away, but it's really coming down the line, and some primaries and the way that they're voting have already been affected. What are you seeing coming up for the general elections regarding COVID-19? What do states need to be doing? What's happening?
Awesome. Okay. I think this is like a long-winded answer. So jump in, cut me off. But I think there's kind of four things. I think COVID definitely changes the conversation around climate. I think when we look at what's happening and we're seeing economies shut down, we're seeing massive reductions in emissions, which is the reality. But obviously, I think we can all agree that this is not the place that we want to be in. This is not how we wanted to get there. Like, obviously having a global pandemic is not how we want to achieve emissions reductions. So I think there's, obviously a conversation to be had about changes in pollution levels and what's kind of happening there. But I think what POW's paying attention to is how does this shape the conversation around the climate movement? How does this change the climate movement? And how does this change politics and what happens in November at the ballot box? And so in terms of it, how it changes the conversation, I think depending on who you talk to, we're looking at kind of a 2 to 4 year economic recession. And that's essentially the reality that we're in. And so whenever we're in a period of recession, our lawmakers are getting together and are talking about like, how do we rebuild the economy? And so whoever takes office, whoever takes the White House in November or wins the White House in November and takes office after that, whoever is winning the seats in Congress, in the House, and in the Senate, those lawmakers are going to have the opportunity to set the policies that rebuild our economy. And when we think about something like the IPCC report, which tells us we essentially have a decade to reduce emissions in order to basically avoid the most catastrophic impacts of climate change, we kind of have this limited window, right? So in 2020, we're down to 10 years to act. And so the policies that Congress and that president sets are absolutely going to be critical to how we reduce emissions. And so if that group of lawmakers comes in and says, great, we're going to like rapidly expand fossil fuel and extraction, and we're going to really rebuild our economy by, extraction and ramping up, like that's going to have devastating consequences. Or if we have a Congress that comes in and says, hey, this is an incredible opportunity to leverage the clean energy economy that already is outcompeting fossil fuels, and we're going to basically make sure that clean energy is on a level playing field, like that is going to accelerate that industry. So essentially, I guess to kind of like wrap up, what I'm saying is the new Congress, the new president, they're going to have the opportunity to set these policies that are going to set us on a pathway to rebuilding our economy and therefore addressing climate. And so in that sense, I think November is even more important. And so maybe, before kind of COVID and before a COVID world, we were all really fired up for November. And now that COVID is happening, like there are obviously really big impacts that are happening in terms of jobs and economic growth and kind of what's going on in our families and our friends and supporting each other in our communities. But I think what POW is going to really try to do is make sure that within, those conversations that you're having, you continue to hear about the election because it's actually growing in importance and not lessening. So with that, I will just add, I think the conversation, Anya, that you brought up about elections, it's really scary when we think about COVID and access to the polls. I think, today Wisconsin has a primary and they've been back and forth between the state Supreme Court and the governor and the federal Supreme Court saying like whether this election should go on and what does the Constitution say about who gets to determine elections. But if you were in Wisconsin, like, would you, and you're under a stay-at-home order, would you be wanting to go out to the polls? Like, that limitation of democracy is super scary. And so I would just say that's something to stay tuned from POW. We're definitely going to start really diving into looking at voter access laws and thinking about how we prepare for November if we're still in a COVID state and kind of at home. And I think one kind of really quick shout out would just be to our friends at Ballot Ready, some partners that we work with to create a make a plan to vote tool. And they are really diving into this and really thinking about, okay, when, POW members come to the make a plan to vote tool that we offer, and they really want to figure out how to do an absentee ballot, or they want to know how their laws have changed in their state, like how can we make sure that information is available? So rest assured that we're working really hard to make sure that we give you all those answers. So that is my long-winded COVID, policy, elections, democracy, all of the things.
No, that's fantastic. I think that's very thorough for our community. And I know it can feel right now like the elections are so far off. Like we're doing primaries, but the general election, November just feels like a very long time away, especially when we're hanging out at home. Time is passing a little bit differently. And on that note, people have been wondering, in the meantime, what are some resources? I know there are some parents who have been asking, like we have kids that are home right now with us, where can we turn them? There are college students who are looking into alternative learning styles right now. Where would you send people who want to learn more about POW, about policy, and about the world we're living in right now?
Awesome. So kind of starting at the intro level for parents, I think I would just say that no one is too young to understand advocacy and to learn to use their voice. And so, helping a kid understand, what it means to have elected officials, what it means to be represented at the state and local and federal level, and how to actually contact those people and tell them what you care about and kind of what your role is as a constituent. So I would just say, like, whether that's starting with how a bill becomes a law, or kind of some general introductory videos. But I think teaching kids that they have a voice is immensely important. So I'd encourage folks to do that. One thing I'm really excited about is I work on the policy and advocacy team with my colleague, Lindsay Halverson, who runs our advocacy. For those of you that have done volunteer trainings, you've met her. And right now she's working extremely hard, I know, alongside you, Anya, and some other team members to launch a volunteer training that's going to be online. So kind of 4-part video series, relatively quick. So things that you can do after work during happy hour, but essentially a series of 4 videos to learn more about how to be a POW volunteer. And then once you complete that video series, you will actually be put into or welcomed to join our new application, which is called Team. So it's an app on your phone. You can download it. You can join the team in kind of each of our battleground states. And then starting in June, we'll have that available for people across the country. But essentially, that's a digital organizing tool. And so I know, Anya, you and Lindsay will be working together to put out content on that every week so that volunteers can share our content. Our calls to action will be on there, like pledging to vote, or you can stay tuned and imagine that we'll have some conversations and calls to action around the stimulus package and how we look at kind of people over polluters and make sure that the clean energy economy is really thought about as we kind of move into some of these packages that are less about recovery and more about stabilization of the economy. So you'll be able to do calls to action through there. Those, of course, will be available through our website and social media as well. But I think getting into this queue for the volunteer training is super exciting. And, across the team, we're working to figure out what are these great, opportunities now that so many of you are home that we can do digitally. So stay tuned on that. I also think just action on social media. I know sometimes it's, people are like, there's so much news out there. I just want to, put my phone down and maybe not pay attention for a little bit. But I think the reality is sharing content with your friends, with your family. And I know Mario, our executive director, spoke to this in the last call, but we are launching kind of a series of events that are going to be happening digitally, conversations between athletes, scientists, brand partners, kind of about this concept of the outdoor state and how the outdoor community has enough kind of power behind it to function as a swing state in an election. And so maybe host a watch party and, watch one of these conversations coming up. They'll be on Tuesdays and Thursdays and, kind of host a conversation with your friends around that. I think another really critical thing is We know across the outdoor community and the outdoor recreation economy right now, there are a lot of shops that are closed. So if you think about your favorite gear store, your outfitter, and I think there's an opportunity to reach out to those folks and say, hey, like there are groups out there that are coming up with some really interesting content. Here's a way to give your community an opportunity to do something good for the environment and for climate and to engage. And so we're really excited to see how people can share this Earth Day kind of outdoor state content throughout their community and really push it out so that we can grow our community and the people that work with us around pledging to vote. And I think lastly, I would just say, you know, I know sometimes for those of us that are home, especially during an economic crisis, you know, how do we help if we have limited means? And I am just going to totally steal a line from Jessie Diggins. I was just on her book launch, which was awesome, digital event, kind of like learning about how, you know, her experience. And she was asked point blank about climate. And she talked about the importance of using your voice and voting and the fact that that doesn't really cost anything. So encouraging your friends to vote and really, you know, talking to people about kind of what I was mentioning earlier, that the election is, you know, now more important than ever. And we're going to have to really do some work to kind of break through some noise and connect with people in that regard.
Amazing, Lindsay. Thank you. This was really helpful. And I think you've so succinctly answered almost every question that our community has thrown at us. So this is incredibly helpful. That being said, this is an ongoing series, and we will be highlighting more staff members, board members, partners, athletes to come. We will post those questions on our Instagram stories where you can ask. But if you do have questions or you just want to get in touch with us, you can reach us at info@protectourwinners.org, and we will follow up. Thank you so much for your time, Lindsay.
Awesome. Thanks, Anya.